Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Psych Bite presentation today on bipolar disorder in families, presented by Courtney Davey, MA, MFT. Courtney Davey is a marriage and family therapist in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She earned her master's from Salle University in marriage and family therapy. Her work and interests focus on anxiety and mood disorders in couples and sex therapy. She currently works with both inpatient and outpatient populations, promoting safety, positive decision-making, and improving communication. Thank you, Courtney, for joining us today. You may start your presentation.
Okay, thank you so much. So today we're going to be talking about families and the dynamics and pieces that come along with bipolar disorder, really mood disorders as a whole, because a lot of times our family connections and our mental health are both entirely connected and can be very, very stressful and things that people want to make sure that they have a good understanding about. So as a whole, everybody has some sort of family to start, whether it's something that you are physically aware of, whether it's somebody that you never really got to know. However, our family dynamics are always built out of the various types of family that we have. So they combine our family of origin, which is referring to the family that you came from, the people who raised you in whatever context that looks like, as well as your chosen family as you get older, choosing both people like friends who become significant parts of your life, as well as, say, significant others, and then having blendings, meaning things like having children, having others who are responsive to the results that you blended in. Interpersonal conflict is inevitable. We all fight with family. We all fight because it's natural to not always agree with anybody. Nobody's ever going to agree entirely with someone. It does not have to be damaging or negative, though. Interpersonal conflict is a phrase that we sometimes associate with a lot of negativity and anger and frustration, and it can be extensive in yelling, screaming, and all sorts of things that we don't associate as positive. However, conflict can be handled in a way that allows two people to disagree and simultaneously benefit both of them at the end. I thought it was just kind of worth noting that, and these are taken from a few different official family therapies, that family has natural hierarchies of power. And this is something that's going to be really important to remember when we're talking about bipolar disorder, because the natural hierarchies, meaning that you know what you can do with certain people. When you were a kid and you knew you couldn't ask dad for something, but if you asked mom just the right way right after she got to sit down for the last half hour and watch her TV show, then the power would switch and you would be more likely to be able to get whatever it is that you wanted. These types of hierarchies affect all of our natural day-to-days, but they affect how much we're affecting each other as well. It's also worth noting that many times, like I said, interpersonal conflict doesn't have to be negative, but it can be. And negative emotional attacks oftentimes stem from something that is much more deep. We call them primary emotions, where there's things like fear of vulnerability, hurt, things that cause us to be exposed in one way or another. And oftentimes we as humans struggle either to express that or are not interested in expressing that. And so we use something called a secondary emotion to kind of cover over it. And those are the things like anger and overwhelming sadness, I can discuss joy, things that are not quite so deep and are much easier to handle. When we're talking about bipolar disorder, we're talking about mood swings, we're talking about things that can create emotional attacks when we're not regulating the way that we're handling things. So this is very important just to remember when sometimes we're going into a direction that is maybe a bit more volatile. Traditionally speaking, when somebody is angry, anger is usually not the only thing that's there. So in terms of bipolar disorder and talking about it with your family, this is something that a lot of people have a very hard time with, especially if you've recently been diagnosed, you've never really heard of a mental health diagnosis in your family. And so talking about a couple of things to remember with this. Unfortunately, stigma is a reality, you know, and I'm the biggest advocate to try and fix that, but it's not something that we can ignore within the reality of this right now. So say kind of hope for the best, prepare for the worst. When you are talking to your family about this and the people that you care about, and letting them know, hey, you know, I've learned something, I've been diagnosed with this disorder, it relates, you know, I'm experiencing manic symptoms, I experience depressive symptoms, how these things interact with you. They are going to have who knows what kind of reaction. We all have differing reactions. So hopefully your family, in the largest of senses, cares about you and it has some sort of support that they can give out of this. And for some people, that support isn't going to look the same kind of way. They may struggle with the idea that this is something that you have. They may struggle with the idea that this is something that is real, but this is a biological disorder that has a behavioral component. All of these things can be overwhelming at times, in the same way that it was likely overwhelming for you when you first learned about this. So it's just something to keep in mind when you are talking to the people you care about this. It's also worth noting that you should take some time when you are talking to them about it to teach them about your personal experiences. If you look in the DSM, which is, you know, the Diagnostic Statistics Manual for Psychiatric Disorders, it has a huge long list of what manic symptoms look like, and it has a huge list of what depressive symptoms look like. You only have to have so many of each for these to count as either a manic episode, a hypomanic episode, or a depressive episode. So two people who both experience bipolar disorder could have vastly different symptoms that occur and vastly different experiences. So it's important to make sure that the people that are around you and your family understand what that looks like for you compared to just the general person. Many people have heard at this point of bipolar disorder. It's not necessarily totally under the rug, which is significant progress for us. So they may have an idea of what that looks like. And so you want to make sure that they understand that I'm manic, this is what I look like, this is what I'm doing, versus when I'm having a depressive episode, and where you are when you're in the middle and when you're not having an episode or swinging and you're in a stable place. It's also worth noting that it's entirely possible that you may have to dispel some myths. There are harmful stereotypes about bipolar, and when people are indecisive, people sometimes utilize that term, oh, they're being bipolar. It's inaccurate and can incite a variety of emotions. So it's important in conversation with your family that, you know, this is not true, this is not how this works. And your family may have questions about this. And so being able to take that time to talk to them about it and dispel these things, move away from some of the stereotypes, will benefit you and then them as a person. It's unfortunate that sometimes we have to be the world's educators because it's something that you're experiencing. However, you are only setting yourself up to benefit yourself and benefit people as a whole by doing so. It's worth noting, when one parent has bipolar disorder, the risk to each child is 15 to 30%. When both parents have bipolar disorder, the risk increases to 50 to 75%. Bipolar disorder is highly hereditary. I can say personally that there's a history in my family of a variety of mood disorders that are incredibly hereditary. So talking to your family about this is also important, because your family may have other people who do experience this, and maybe they don't talk about it, but finding that extra support or finding that education and going, hey, you know, I experienced similar things, could be incredibly beneficial. Having multiple people in one family having episodes does occur. A mom and daughter who both experience it, you know, siblings who both experience it. These do happen, and they need to be handled with care and support. The important piece of this is identifying and empathizing with the other person who also experiences this, because you are going to have the kind of experience that nobody else will. For somebody who does not live with bipolar disorder, there's always going to be a bit of an empathy gap because they don't truly experience it. However, if you have family members who do also experience symptoms of bipolar disorder, this may be a great place to find that sense of not being alone and understanding. It's also important that to know that you need to utilize that strength and not the weakness. Unfortunately, sometimes people also receive or go into episodes if they're not either following a treatment, or you know, a particular stressor occurs that swings them, and when those happen simultaneously, it can be more intense, and the negative outcomes that can come out of something like that can be more intense. And so it's very important to utilize the strengths of each other rather than focusing on the weaknesses. As a whole, when talking to family about bipolar disorder, when interacting with them, boundaries are going to be vital, because boundaries are vital to every relationship. The piece of this that is important to the person living with bipolar disorder is that there is a personal responsibility for behaviors that's occurring. Like I said, bipolar disorder is a biological and behavioral disorder. If you look at CT scans, you can see the various differences that occur in the brain. And when people are experiencing a manic episode, a hypomanic episode, a depressive episode, the behavioral components are significantly easier to fall into, particularly given the lower impulse control, things of that nature. However, when you're dealing with other people, it's important to remember that your behaviors do have consequences for others. And so being able to take responsibility when you interact in both the positive and negative ways is going to be important for your relationship. As well, setting up the preventative measures is going to be incredibly important when you're interacting with your family if you begin to head towards an episode. So having this conversation for both of you is going to be important. Like I said, how do I tell you that I'm concerned? Sometimes it can be hard to hear that somebody thinks your behaviors are recognized or as part of the symptom of the disorder. How do I explain when I'm feeling manic or depressed? How can I say that something doesn't feel right and I'm asking for support? How can I reach out to you and make sure that I'm heard? It's important as a whole that we have appropriate receptive language with this, because all of this is going to be, or it could be, sensitive information. Sometimes it can be hard to differentiate between what is a symptom of bipolar and what is just an emotional reaction, or just a reaction, or just a normal behavior. And for those who don't live with bipolar disorder, that in particular can be a hard line to walk along. So making sure that there's receptive language for both parties so that everybody is in a place where they can hear the other person, even when the defenses can sometimes naturally come up. So it's worth noting that there is sometimes a relational strain. Like I said, there's interpersonal conflict in all families, but there can be a relational strain that occurs for families and the family members. A lot of times it can cause emotional stress, worries, fears, when you making sure that the person that you care about is okay, making sure that the person that you care about is interacting with people in a way that is safe, in a way that is respectful to everybody, when making sure that the person that you live with is respecting your understanding of your body and how you react to things. And all of this can cause stress. So it's just very important to be aware of the other person. Family members need to be aware of the additional stress that those who live with bipolar disorder, various mood disorders, like I said, a lot of this really applies to all sorts of mental health issues, because the stressors that go along with that are something that they don't physically experience. So being aware and being able to take the step back and say, hey, okay, this person, is experiencing this, that, and the other in this moment, and this is difficult. So I need to maybe move my expectations a little bit for today. It's also important that the person living with the disorder is aware of the stress and the extra expectations that are made for the partner, your parents, whoever the family member really is. Knowing that sometimes it can be hard to have somebody who is heading into a manic episode. That can be a very stressful situation, because you're concerned about various safety concerns, things of that nature, or depressive episodes, and you sit there and you worry about the person in 8 different kinds of ways. So being aware that your behaviors impact other people is going to go a long way in terms of how you're controlling the fact that it does affect them. This is really cliche, but communicate is the biggest thing here. Nothing will be fixed or improved if you don't let the other person know it's a problem. So around something like that, that needs to be brought up, and vice versa. If you're somebody who has a family member who has bipolar disorder, that is, and say the behavior is not something that you're comfortable with, or it's something that is concerning to you and you want to be able to talk about it to them rather. If you don't communicate, then nothing is going to change. Communication is truly key at the end of the day, no matter how many times you've heard it before. So just as a final note, some of the things some of the places to kind of start if you're experiencing these things. Well, the International Bipolar Foundation, they are a wealth of supports, information, all sorts of things, whether you are somebody who lives with bipolar disorder, if you're someone who cares about someone who has bipolar disorder. They have tons of literature, etc., to try and help the things. I write family and couples related blogs for them, and so those are on the site as well. It's also worth noting that NAMI is another great resource. They have a lot of same kinds of information. They have other different kinds of information. They have a lot of research studies, things of that nature that can help direct you. If things are getting to a point where we're no longer, we refer to as functional, things aren't as where we want them to be, I would always encourage somebody to go talk to a therapist. In particular, I suggest talking in the United States. At the very least, we have a licensed marriage and family therapist, because they're trained in family systems, some of the things that I was bringing up throughout this, and those are the types of therapies that may be necessary to help you guys get to whatever place that looks like. It's also worth noting, as a whole, there are support groups both for people who experience bipolar disorder and for people who are living with someone or care for someone who has bipolar disorder. And these are something that I would always encourage you to utilize, because you're never alone in whatever the stress that you're experiencing with this. Chances are you are neither the first nor the last. And that is a good thing, because that means that there are others who will be able to help you with their personal experiences in getting through whatever you're doing and making your relationship with the people in your life as positive as possible. Okay. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen and allowing me to give you a little bit of information about this. If you need to, or feel free to contact me if you have any further questions, or feel free to contact the International Bipolar Foundation. They'll be happy to try and get me in contact with you guys, okay? So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Courtney. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Bye.